I started for school very late, and was in great dread of scolding, especially because Hamill had said that he would question us on participles, and I didn't know a word about them.
The last lesson. Let us start the first lesson, that is, the last lesson. The lesson is set in the days of Franco-Prussian War, in which France was defeated by Prussia. In this chapter, the districts of Alsace and Lorraine have gone into Prussian hands. What effect this had on life at school? Let's see.
For a moment, I thought of running away and spending the day out. It was so warm, so bright. The birds were chirping at the edge of the woods, and the Prussian soldiers were drilling in the field at the back of the sawmill. It was much more attracting than the rule of participles. But I had the strength to resist, and hurried off to school. When I passed the town hall, there was a crowd in front of the bulletin board. For the last 2 years, all the bad news came from there, the lost battles, the draft, the orders of the commanding officer. And I thought to myself, without stopping, what could be the matter now? Then as I hurried by as fast as I could go, Watcher, the blacksmith, with his apprentice, called me.
Don't go fast, bub. You'll get to your school in time.
I thought he was making fun of me. I reached Hamill's garden, all out of breath.
Usually, when schools began, there was a great bustle, which could be heard out in the street. The opening and closing of desks, lessons repeated very loud, and the teacher's ruler rapping on the table. But now, it was so still.
I had depended on the noise to get to my desk without being seen, but that day, everything was as quiet as Sunday morning. Through the window, I saw my classmates, already in their places, and Hamill walking up and down, with his terrible eye ruler under his arm. I had to open the door, and go in before everybody. You can understand how ashamed and how frightened I was. But, when I entered the class, nothing happened. Hamill saw me.
Go to your place quickly, Franz. We were beginning without you.
I sat on the bench. When I had got a little control over my fright, I noticed that he had on his beautiful green coat, his frilled shirt, and the little black silk cap that he never wore, except on inspection and prize days. Besides, the whole school seemed so strange and serious. But the thing that surprised me the most was that on the back benches, that were always empty, the village people were sitting quietly like ourselves.
Old Hauser, with his three-cornered hat, the former mayor, the former postmaster, and several others sat on the back benches. Everybody looked sad. Hauser had bought an old primer, that is, a book for learners, which was thumbed at the edges. Held it open to his knees, with his great spectacles lying on the pages. While Franz was wondering about it all, Hamill moved his chair, gently said,
My children, this is the last lesson I shall give you. The order has come from Berlin, to teach only German in the schools of Alsace and Lorraine. The new master comes tomorrow. This is your last French lesson. I want you to be very attentive.
What a thunderclap those words were to me. Oh, the wretches. That was what they had put at the town hall.
Wretches are unhappy people. Here, wretches is referring to the informers of this news at the town hall.
My last lesson. Why, I hardly knew how to write. I could never learn any more. I would stop here, then. Oh, how sorry I was, for not learning my lessons, for looking at birds' eggs, or going sliding on the saw. My books, that had been seemed trouble a while ago, so heavy to carry, my grammar, and my history of the saints, were old friends now that I couldn't give up. And Hamill, too. The idea that he was going away, that I should never see him again, made me forget all about his ruler, and how cranky he was.
Cranky means strange.
Poor man. It was in his honor of this last lesson that he had put on his fine Sunday clothes, and now I understood why the old men of village were sitting there in the back of the room. It was because they were sorry, too, that they had not gone to school. It was their way of thanking our master for his 40 years of faithful service, and of showing their respect for the country that was no more theirs.
Franz, it's your turn to recite.
I tried so hard to say that terrible rule of participles, all through, loud and clear. But I got mixed up on the first words, and stood there, holding onto the desk, my heart beating, and not daring to look up.
I won't scold you, little Franz. You must feel bad enough. See how it is. Every day we have said to ourselves, "Bah, I've plenty of time. I'll learn it tomorrow." And now see where we've come out. Ah, that's the great trouble with Alsace. She puts off learning till tomorrow. Now, those people out there will say to you, "How is it? You pretend to be Frenchmen, and yet you can neither speak nor write your own language. But you're not the worst. Poor little Franz. We've a lot more things to damn ourselves. Your parents were not anxious enough to have you learn. They preferred to put you work on a farm, or at the mills, so as to have a little more money. And I've been to blame also. Haven't I often sent you to water my flowers, instead of learning your lessons? And when I wanted to go fishing, didn't I just give you a holiday?"
Then, from one thing to another, Hamel went on to talk of the French language, saying that it was the most beautiful language in the world, the clearest, the most logical, that we must guard it among us, and never forget it. Because when a people are enslaved, as long as they hold fast to their language, it is as if they had the key of their prison.
Then, he opened a grammar, and read us a lesson. I was amazed to see how well I understood it. All he said seemed so easy, so easy. I think, too, that I'd never listened so carefully, and that he had never explained everything with so much patience. It seemed as if the poor man wanted to give us all he knew, before going away, and to put it all into our heads at one stroke.
After the grammar, they had a lesson in writing. That day, Hamel had new copies for them, written in a beautiful round hand. It was written, France, Alsace, France, Alsace. They looked like little flags, floating everywhere in the schoolroom.
You should have seen how everyone set to work, and how quiet it was. The only sound was the scratching of the pens over the paper. Once, some beetles flew in, but nobody paid attention to them, not even the littlest children. On the roof, the pigeon cooed very low, and I thought to myself, will they make them sing in German, even the pigeons?
They is referred to German people.
Whenever I looked up, I saw Hamel sitting still, and gazing at one thing, then at another, as if he wanted to fix in his mind how everything looked in that schoolroom. For 40 years, he had been there in the same place, with his garden outside the window, and his class in front of him, just like before. Only the desks and benches had been worn smooth, the walnut trees in the garden were taller, and the hope vine that he had planted himself climbed about the windows to the roof. How it must have broken his heart to leave it all, poor man. To hear his sister moving about in the room above, packing their trunks, as they must leave the country next day.
But he had the courage to hear every lesson, to the very last. After the writing, they had a lesson in history, and then, the babies chanted their Bubby Bible bushels. At the back of the room, Hauser had put on his spectacles, and holding his primer in both hands, spelled the letters with them.
You could see that he too was crying, and his voice trembled with emotion, and it was so funny to hear him, that we all wanted to laugh and cry. Ah, how well I remember it, that last lesson.
All at once, the church clock struck 12. Then started Angelus, that is, a prayer. At the same moment, the trumpets of the Prussians, returning from the drill, sounded under the windows.
Hamel stood up, very pale. I never saw him look so tall.
He looked tall, because he was confident.
"My friends, I.
Something choked him. He couldn't go on. Then, he turned to the blackboard, took a piece of chalk, and, Bearing on with all his power, he wrote as large as he could, "Vive la France," which means, "Long live France." Then, without a word, he made a gesture to all with his hand, as if saying, "School is dismissed, you may go."